28, the issue of the emergency resolution is coming to the board. I doubt it will come to the resolution. That resolution will have all the government in school. We have to university embrace it and then develop a plan. And what the county is also doing right now is hiring a consultant that will hopefully be hired by the cities. That's the plan, to tell us how we get there. But the problem now is we don't have these goals. Those are not it's more just how are we going to get to climate sustainability, which is maybe a less ambitious goal. But I think embracing their 100% renewable energy by 2030 and net zero carbon by 2040 is a very ambitious goal, and we should set the ambitious goal and get all the government entities working together and develop a strategic plan to get there. So you don't waste time. This is the plan. This is how we're going to get there. And then we also have to engage the community and business. It's not just government, but everybody in the community, because government can't do it all. But that's what I would spend the next 4 years doing. And then following up, each year in a strategic plan, you have measures that you're going to take, and I would want those measures to be pretty ambitious.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Linda, would you like to speak to the question?
Sure. I mean, as I mentioned, was in Australia and could see the devastation firsthand. What is happening there to our world and the front lines of it there. I suffer from asthma, and so the smoke in the air was quite something when I was there. And even here, you can hear it in my voice still. Yolo County is an agricultural county, and 85% ag and open space, which is wonderful for climate change issues and doing our part, or feeding the world, carbon neutral aspects of it. And we also have one of the top farmers in the world with the Romangers here, who continue to get awards for their sustainability. In fact, I believe Romanger Brothers will be in Monterey this weekend picking up for an award for the best in the nation, best in the state for their sustainability efforts in farming. And I think we can lead here in Yolo in those efforts, showing, like that David's talked about as well on cover crop issues. How do we integrate that into our county here? What kind of farming practices make sense going forward with regard to climate change issues? What do we do? Orchards to row crops to other things. What makes sense? And we've got this wonderful engine of ingenuity sitting right here at UC Davis, where we have world-renowned experts that come from it, around it, that are here in our community that we can tap into, and creating I call it a rural innovation hub, where we are bringing the minds together. Because what we do here in Yolo is wonderful, and I want us to achieve those same goals that Jim talked about and that Davis talked about. But what we do here is one thing, and we can be an example. But if we can teach the rest of the world and teach other places what to do, that's just going to spread it out even further, the reach of what we have here. Valley Clean Energy, I think, is a wonderful step in the right direction. Having local control, keeping that here. We've all experienced the joy and the pains of PG&E. I came from a community, I used to live in Sacramento with SMUD. And it was a hard transition coming from SMUD to here. And seeing also what happened with regard to the fires in winters and shutting down people's sources to energy. Let's bring it local. Let's bring it here. Let's have the solar farms here. Let's generate our power here. And I agree with Jim as far as working with the other communities. The county can't tell Davis what to do, and it can't tell West Sacramento what to do. But what it can do is it has jurisdiction over the Gwindas, the Knights Landings, the other towns here, the Clarksburgs, the Espartos. They are under county jurisdiction. What more can we do there? What more can we do as far as our building codes? What can we be doing towards implementing actual in our hand changes? And I love talking about it. I love setting goals. It's something to attain, but let's get doing it. And what have we been doing to get it done? And it's a crisis, and we need to step forward to do more.
Yeah,
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of what Jim and Linda are saying. I think what we need to do is build a strong community collaboration. So it's not just something that we solve within government, but we're building a grassroots effort where we're all involved in this, the local Green New Deal or whatever we call it. Doesn't really matter. It's just like a little it involves every single sector of our economy and of land use and agriculture and habitat protection. There's so many different issues, and I think we need to start addressing the root issues that's caused the devastation over the last 150, 200 years. California used to be a paradise. Its name is California because the Spanish novelist came or the Spanish colonizer came, and it's like, oh, this is it. This is California from the great Spanish novel of billions of birds and millions of grazing animals and
Land of the Amazons.
Huh?
California means land of the Amazon.
Oh yeah. So it was just this spectacular place, and in a very short period of time, the economies that we generated here have destroyed a lot of that. So I think we need to look at the underlying issues that have created this problem in the first place, and where our dollars are going and how our money is fueling the destruction. It's like, I think we're all on the same page as far as the renewable energy and the carbon neutrality, and we need to be doing all of that, and we also need to be addressing our economic system. And there's so much that we can do here locally. So I think local empowerment is the way to go.
Thank you for your responses. So just to recap, Jim, you were talking about having coalitions across different structures in government, city level, working together with the county. And Linda was focusing on agriculture and being a rural, what did you call it?
Innovation hub.
A rural innovation hub, where we could learn how to use Yolo County as a model for what other communities could do going forward into this climate crisis. And Dave was talking about rethinking how we do grassroots movements and how do we coordinate from the ground up. Would you guys like to potentially speak to each other's perspective? I think you guys offer three different but very interesting ways of going forward. Just anybody?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think just like working back, I'm like, yes, I totally agree with what you said, Jim, and I agree with what you said, Linda. So I feel like we're kind of all on the same page, and we're figuring it out. Like what we need to do is like it's like not just one answer to anything, but it's like a whole suite of ideas and solutions that we need to implement. But yeah, totally agree. We need to change, well, not just change, but we need to help farmers to transition to regenerative agriculture, because that's our greatest climate solution. And yeah, I think we just need to keep working together. Like all the solutions are out there, and I think we need to like write all these things down. We need to survey the community, so it's like everything that that we're all putting together, we can see where the overlap is, and what the research institutions say, what the farmers need. We'll figure it out that way.
It's kind of a learning curve. Agriculture is fundamentally conservative. The organic, non-pesticide approach came in, that wasn't very well accepted, but now it is accepted. It takes some time. The regenerative agriculture really has the potential to save money for farmers and actually make farming better. But what you probably have to do is demonstrate that it works. And David and I talked about this, that maybe there could be a pilot project where you could demonstrate even, and sometimes it's a lot easier to get money for a pilot project than for something that changes the system overnight. But if you can demonstrate that it works, then farmers are going to want to do it, and other agricultural counties are going to want to do it. And it does work. I think it will work, but you just have to put resources into it. And then one of the things the county can do is seek out grants from private sources, state and federal sources, and then show that there's an approach to agriculture that makes good use of the soil and is regenerative in terms of agriculture. And then that, in terms of Linda's point, that could tie into UC Davis. UC Davis could be involved in a pilot project. They could be involved in putting those ideas out there.
And we already have it happening. We have the Romagers are doing it. They are farming this way. They are at the forefront of doing this type of, as we were talking about the cover crops and doing the regenerative agriculture. He's talking to the other farmers, bringing it to the Farm Bureau, doing that. And I think it's continuing, and whatever the county can do, continue to spread that word and working with ag extensions and working with everybody else that you see and such. I think we just continue it. We've got the pilot project happening. Just take them out to the Romagers and take it from there.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'd like to transition to the third question. There's some issues with the second one. I'm not sure whether the Yolo County Climate Emergency Declaration is ready to be reviewed yet. I think there was a little bit of confusion there, and I take responsibility for that. But the third question is, as a leader of Yolo County, what do you think the responsibility of a county government is to ascertain that these climate goals are reached? And I think you guys already touched on this a little bit in framing your first question. But what responsibilities fall to the public in your perspective and to the business sectors? And how do you envision the government working together with grassroots movements and businesses to reach the climate goals?
I'm going to have somebody else go first.
Yeah, Jim, you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, I think it's an equal responsibility. Sometimes when people look to government and they say the government passes a bill or a policy, and they say, okay, it's done. I don't have to think about it anymore. And that's really the beginning, not the end. If we were to pass the resolution or the Green New Deal, whatever we were to pass, that's the beginning, and government really can't do it on its own. So the role of business would become engaged, and the role of the public to be actively engaged. So when we did our habitat conservation plan, and it's now called the Yolo Conservancy, before it was called the Yolo Habitat Conservation Plan, and we have a plan, and it took several years to do it. But we have what's called an advisory committee with experts in the field, where people from UC Davis, scientists, community members, and all people with a wealth of people from business with a wealth of knowledge. And the advisory committee was almost too soft of a term because they were so active in helping us to develop the policies that they had the expertise to offer, more so than people in government. But then in government, we were able to take those ideas and policies and then put them into the plan, which is now our Yolo Habitat Conservation Plan. And I think we could do the same with a climate plan, is to have an active, engaged group that's working to develop it, not just somebody that meets once a month, but a group of people actively involved. And I know that UC Davis scientists were actively involved, and for years, some of these folks worked on their own dime for 10 years to get this done. So they're out there and they're available in our community.
We are so lucky to have these resources here, these green resources that other communities have to ask UC Davis professors to fly out to or come to and to share their expertise. And they live here. So we can tap into them, and that's absolutely right. What Jim was saying is to bring the folks together and having a joint task force of sorts, and definitely have UC be part of that because they have that expertise. But I see that, government, county government, we set the standards. We can set the regulations. We can say, okay, any new housing going into Esparto, it has to be all electric or whatever it might be. We could be putting in saying, we want to encourage small business owners in the sense of, we had the issue with no home kitchens because of health concerns. Well, why don't we look at putting in some kitchens around the county, putting in a community kitchen in Esparto, putting in community kitchen in Gwyndas, different places that bring income into the communities. And I say this in the context in here because we can talk about, I can go out, not easily, I could go out and get an electric car. I could put solar on my house, but not everybody can do that. And we got to bring all of us on board and have the income to do it. We have a solar farm somewhere in the county that folks can have a share in or do something because they can't afford to put the solar panels on their house. Or there's trees and they want to keep the trees around their house, because I would want to do that as well. How do we bring everybody up to do this? And it's, as you said, it's an economic issue too. Capitalism is not the answer going forward. It's kind of led us to where we are at, but how do we work with that going forward as well? So as we were saying, you know, the county sets the standards and sets the regulations. And that's what we can do, and we can encourage you to come along and say, join us in this, and maybe we can help you out here by finding the grant money, doing this to get what you need to go forward. But it's going to be a collaboration. It's going to be businesses knowing they can make money doing it, because that's the model that we have, showing them that they can make money in doing this and why it's the right thing to be doing. The community, we're doing that. We're educating more and more within Davis. I know we are outside in the county as well. I think we can do more. And it's going to be that type of a partnership.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah, definitely echo things that Jim and Linda said as well. I think it's when we look at like the role of government is support people in living healthy, happy, abundant lives. And I think and it's to create legislation that protects our environments and to make sure that there's access to opportunities for people. And I think we need to rethink the way that government operates a little bit, because right now, like the general way that government operates is that they come up with solutions that they think will address a problem. But I think we need to dig deeper into community issues and actually like really survey each community, survey the farmers, survey businesses, and find out what their needs are and figure out from that data. Then, and government does this.
Maybe see where the most like emissions are coming from. Just, like, stuff there.
See where the most what?
Carbon emissions are.
Right.
That's what we talk about, and just like see what's the biggest.
Right. Which is transportation. So yeah, so we're looking. We need to get the data from all the researchers, and we're in a really unique place with UC Davis and the farmers and the residents of county. So I think if we're thinking, what does government look like in this decade of needing to solve these overlapping crises, I think we really need to survey each community, and especially the communities that are most in need and going to be most affected by climate change, and see what their needs are, and what happens in the case of a huge drought, who gets affected the most there, and then mobilize resources towards preparing our county to face those challenges. So I think of government as a support role with a lot of power. So it's like if we can design a system within our county that takes into account the needs of people and has really good data from people, then I think it puts the government in a position to make better decisions, and not, instead of, we think this is good, we're going to get really good data. So it's like, it just creates a more resilient system of government.
And I think that's part of doing a strategic plan, as we mentioned, is looking at, well, where are the carbon emissions coming from? Where is the biggest issue? And then setting some goals. And the county definitely has a role. I mean, we could look at, for example, new construction. There hasn't been much new housing construction in the county because most of the housing goes in the cities, but that doesn't mean it won't happen in the future.
So the house that I live in right now is the cannery. They just put it in?
Pardon?
The cannery?
Well, the cannery is actually in the city of Davis.
Yeah, so it's in the county. In Yolo.
Well, no, but I mean, we have, county has jurisdiction of land and building outside of the city, even though it's in the county, outside of the incorporated cities.
County,
So,
you have the county boards.
Yeah, that's our authority, our building authority. Although,
I would say they're doing, I don't know how it helps, but we're all on solar panels.
that actually helps. And what I was going to say is that we can do, the State Energy Commission is going to be enforcing regulations that require solar on all new homes as of January 1st.
Okay.
But there's already been efforts to create exceptions and to limit that. So I think there's a
legislator and
value
law,
in
like,
cities and county doing their own requirement, because I think we'll have the ability to be a little stricter about people that want to get out their compliance. And then in cars, for example, I think, I got plug-in Prius, and it wasn't expensive because once you subtract out the tax credit and the rebate, I got a new car for $15,000, and people are buying new cars for $30,000 in Vegas or $35,000. Now, not everyone can buy a new car, but I think we don't get the information out to people about these rebates and a tax credit, not a deduction, an actual credit. So I think we could encourage people to drive electric cars and less polluting vehicles, since that's a significant source for our rebate.
And I'm sorry, I just want to follow up on that some too, and that, let's look at one point, the county was considering a transportation tax, to fund more mass transit within the county. And I think we need to be looking in that direction again. We need to get people out of cars and into other vehicles. We're not going to solve I-80 or any of that by having, if we were all in electric cars going to Sacramento every day, we're still going to be a parking lot there. We need more people per vehicle going over the causeway.
And more in mass transit.
And more in mass transit. So maybe it's time to explore
we had
that.
2 votes, non-sale or 9, we're for it.
Exactly. I know, we couldn't get that third vote.
That third vote, so we'll try again.
So, let's look at that. So.
I had one more question for you guys.
I was just going to say, I just read something recently, and I don't remember where it was, but they were aiming to have free transportation. So the bus is there, and you can get on and get off as needed in the city, let's say, or,
Like West Sacramento.
Okay, yeah, I had one more question for you guys, and then I was going to open it up for us to ask questions to the candidates here. My question is, what do you guys think are potentially the biggest obstacle for Yolo County going forward to meet these climate goals? I think we mentioned that we still haven't quite created that strategic plan yet. So that's assuming that we do have a strategic plan of action. Is there anything that we can anticipate as an obstacle, something that would be difficult to work through?
Your battery's running low.
No.
That's not my answer. Wow. I think there's a lot of obstacles, like when you think about just resistance to change, and we're gonna have to figure out a way to make it so the change is wanted by people. So it's not like a burden, so we don't go into climate austerity and climate fascism, and there's all these roadblocks that could come up. As if we decide we're going to go green, say we're going to go carbon neutral by 2040, and then we just start legislating on people, and who does that affect? So we have to make everything. We have to make all these solutions really accessible. So an example would be with regenerative agriculture. We can't just legislate on farmers and tell them they have to do something because without a support structure, because otherwise their farm closes and then we have more problems. Or farmers they're very they're very strong as individuals and groups. So we have to make inroads with these communities, and we have to ask them what they need and support them. I already said that in the last one, but I think the challenge is figuring out ways to implement climate legislation that people will agree with, they'll want to participate in, and it'll be good for everybody. You'll be able to taste it, you'll be able to feel it, you'll be able to make the bus enjoyable, like an easy experience. You miss one, you're not freaking out because you missed, there's not another bus for an hour. There'll be one 10, 15 minutes later. It'll be clean. We'll be able to breathe the air. We'll be able to drink the water. Recharge the groundwater and dilute that hexachromium. What do you call it? It's just we can clean up. Yeah. Hexachromium. Yeah. So I think the challenge is creating solutions that are inclusive and that people want to be part of. Which takes a longer process.
Well, along with that, finances. The county's not rich. We're not a rich county when you compare to say an urban county. We have a lot of farmland, which is great, and open space, which is wonderful. But it's taxed at a lower rate. It just is. And farmers pay a lower rate, and that's the Williamson Act, if I can speak. But that's a burden for us. They have the tax base to do it going forward. And so we're going to have to be looking at grant programs. And you mentioned, the California Energy Commission, has grants out there for providing technical assistance for folks and entities wanting to do more green with regard to solar, et cetera. But we're going to have to, fight with fight's the right word. We're going to have to join with our state representatives and say, look, come on, we're going to need help from you at the state level to make this happen for us here. And go and bat for us. Come on, Cecilia. Come on, Dodge. Show us what you're going to do for us. You say you're for the farmer. You say you are for these things. Show us. Because the county on its own financially can't do it. We're going to need more resources. That's, to me, our biggest challenge on what David said.
Of course, the governor just announced today that more money is going to be available to local government. But one of the things you find when you're at the county level is once that trickles down to your particular county, it's not as much as it sounds like at the state level. So there probably needs to be more than that, but it's an excellent start. I think there's always resistance to regulation. I think they have a good point that we have to bring people along and make sure that they understand the reason for what we're doing. And to the extent that people can do things voluntarily, that's always better. But sometimes you need regulations, and people need to understand why they're there and what the purpose is. So working with the farmers, working with the businesses, working with local communities is going to be really important. And I think, though, having the ambitious goals to actually be 100% renewable by 2030, commitment to net zero carbon 2040, those are really ambitious goals. And when you have an ambitious goal, it's easier to argue to spend the money because you will, each local government, and I hope it's not just Yolo County, I hope it's counties and cities throughout the state will say, this is where we are, this is where we need to get to, and this is going to be the cost. It's easier to argue than just this kind of nebulous, we need funds to do this. And that's why it's so important to have a plan in place, to know what the priorities are, and to be able to focus on it.
All right. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask the supervisors?
Supervisors.
Candidates.
We're going to expand the board.
The goals that you articulated by 2030, by 2040 are crucially important. But I wonder what you might be thinking about near-term threats now that resilience has become a word and there's movement in the legislature to allocate a resilience bond and move money for that. What do you see as the near-term threats that Yolo County needs to be concerned about? And so what do you think about, the resilience for short-term, near-term types of impacts?
I just talked. Somebody else want to go?
Cool. Yeah, resilience is so I think of this is a decade of climate action where we need to move off fossil fuels and change our economies off extractive economies and fossil fuel economies and economies that create vast inequality and resilience. So there's two sides of the same coin of what we need to do, because when we talk about climate change, we have 10 years before we see the effects are happening right now. And what happens if we get another extended drought, crop failure. So I think in terms of resilience, I envision food security within communities. I was out knocking doors today, and the first person I talked to is an urban farmer, and their entire front yard was transitioned into a garden. They're growing a ton of food there. So if we're growing food within our communities, we're not depending on an agricultural system that is prone to failure. Not the Romangers, but a monocrop. The industrial food system is not resilient at all. So while we help farmers transition, the other aspect of resilience relates to the farmers. If we transition to regenerative agriculture, you can hold so much more water in the soil. We can recharge our groundwater, less soil erosion. So we can begin to reverse those things while we address resilience within same within doing the same actions. So that's part of it. It's a huge question how we tackle resilience.
I think the availability of short-term water is definitely an issue. As there's more droughts, we have a groundwater agency which I serve on, and we are developing a plan to ensure that no one is able to overtax the groundwater. And all of the reclamation agencies, there's a lot of water that's not governed by one county agency, as you might think. There's a lot of little small reclamation districts of board of 3. That's one family that has been on the board for 100 years. But there's a wealth of knowledge there too. But what we've done is pull them all together to work on groundwater, and I think have a commitment to take whatever actions necessary to make sure we don't recharge it, particularly if there's a drought, and then making sure that we have adequate supply of water going forward. And a lot of that is coordination with the state and federal government, because they all have interest in that. And then looking at the impact on agriculture of the various water projects. Right now, I've been working to try to balance what's going on with fish, which is habitat for fish, trying to save salmon. And the reason we're doing that is because so many are killed when water is sent to Southern California from the Delta. But in doing that, too much water at the wrong time of year has resulted in threats to agriculture. So I've worked with the federal and state government to balance that, to make sure that when we do put extra water in, it doesn't affect the planting of the crops, for example, so that the rice industry can stay in business, so that the people who grow crops in the Delta can stay in business. And there is there's a conservation function of agriculture if it's done right, and that's what we need to work to promote on the short term and the long term. I think another real threat is this kind of on the one hand you can have droughts, then on the other hand 2 years later you can have flooding, and properly preparing for that is a challenge because it also threatens agriculture. Now, the United Nations said that with the climate change that's going on now, just the current problems with climate change are going to lead to starvation. There's a lot of areas in the world that aren't able to grow food anymore. So in addition to becoming independent in terms of what we can do for ourselves with agriculture, we're going to be looked to as a source of food for the world. California is the largest agricultural state in the nation, and we are also a source of food for the nation and the world. We are exporting a lot of food, and there's going to be more and more need to prevent starvation in the world with climate change. So as we're building resilience on a climate change policy, we also have to make sure that we protect agriculture, make sure that they're a vibrant part of our economy.
A couple things. I was going to answer the question first. Thanks. Some of the short-term challenges. Well, one of the short-term challenges is PG&E. They're kind of a roadblock to a lot of what we want to do, and through their bankruptcy is an issue of trying to get change done through that. It can be a process. I'm a bankruptcy attorney. I know what that process can be like. I don't work for them. No. Thank goodness.
You're not representing.
No, I'm not. And the roadblocks that are put up about that. I mean, what do we need to look at that? I mean, are we going to want to take control over the assets here? You know, Valley Clean Energy was looking at buying the assets from PG&E. Does that make sense? The corporate yard here, does that make sense for us to have that here? They represent the old way, and I don't know how PG&E is going to change around on that, but we need to be pushing in that direction. So I think that is a big short-term problem dealing with regard to resiliency. Thank you for bringing that up with regard to saving the salmon and such, and what we're going to do in that regard. I just took a tour out. John Whitcomb owns some land. I think he has a duck club up north of the Yolo Basin Foundation that I'm on the board of, and we're trying to figure out, well, how do you balance our waterfowl, which we all love to go out and duck days and take the kids out and see all of that, If we flood that land too much and too long, we lose our ducks. But we become a fish farm for salmon. Well, is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. Those are the issues that we have to figure out. Of how long do we keep the water out there? Have the water this deep, the ducks love it. You go that deep and they're starving. And we lose our ducks and other waterfowl. And I agree that it's working with the farmers and working with the rice farmers. I mean, you remember when we were burning the rice fields and what that was doing to the air, et cetera. Now we're flooding the fields and creating habitat. That's the direction to be going in. So I appreciate that we're working on how to go forward with the Yolo Basin and what the right direction is on that. I know there's a lawsuit that's going to try to stop them lowering that weir at this point. There's this Fremont weir that lets the water in, and do we go lower with that? If we do, that lets more water in or not. And the county, I believe, is in negotiations trying to figure out what's the right way forward on that as well, and what role the county wants to take. Yolo Basin Foundation might be looking at taking a role with regard to this as well. But those, to me, would be some of the issues that I hope that helps Lorenzo. Okay.
Scott, do you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question. Speak a little louder, please. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of eating the role, talking about generative ag, looking at what this county used to, how will Yolo County adjust to that? With 70% of Yolo food is grown by subsistence farmers.
Well, we haven't had a problem finding places to export food. We export quite a bit. Very strong economy, and we also have plenty of food for our local economy and for the state. But just the challenges to agriculture they're very technical sometimes. Like we were talking about this project to bring in more water by lowering the Fremont weir for the salmon project. Well, we had to go out individually to meet with all the farmers because they're too busy farming to come to meetings, and they don't. You can set up a community meeting and you get one or two or maybe none. And so the only way to really communicate was we went and spoke to each of the farmers in the bypass and found out, well, why is this a threat to you, and how can we solve it? And what they all said was, well, the additional water for the fish is fine. Water is good for rice too, as you know, the rice fields. But we have to have the fields dry in order to plant for the next season. So the additional water has to stop on March 15th so that the fields can dry out in time for us to plant the crop the next year. We had to fight tooth and nail with the state and federal government because they wanted to go till June 15th, but they eventually agreed to the March 15th date, that was the major concession that will allow our agriculture to continue. We're continuing to negotiate to make sure if there's other unintended consequences of the project, that they compensate agriculture and the county for that. But the major concession was made, and that took about 5 years of work to get them to that point. One of the problems is that you have different levels of government, and if you have somebody concentrating on salmon, that's all they're focused on. They're not focused on the birds, but we care about the birds because we have the wildlife area, and thousands of birds going from Canada, resting here, and then on to Mexico, and the whole wildlife area. Then you have somebody that cares about birds. They're not focused on fish. Well, in government, we have to look at the whole picture and make everything work, and that's kind of what we do. We balance one interest against the other and make it all work. And so far, we're succeeding.
Could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, the question is, having a relatively conventional farming community, which is the largest representative of agriculture, how does this kind of respond to that? That most of the food grown in Europe is grown by subsistence farmers.
Can I get a definition on subsistence? Yeah.
Subsistence means that they're basically that individual can walk around their properties without mechanical equipment, but they subsist and do not have mechanization but that's all they do. It's to make food for themselves and whatever else they have this side. Like typically it's a small, typically low mechanized food. So things that in India, places where some of our products are sold in mass, it's
They may not be able to continue that. That's one of the things with the climate change is that it's not going to be so easy to do that.
it's the same thing.
Well, part of it, is being a teaching university. And what are we going to teach going forward on the types of farming to be done? Yolo is going to export food. I mean, we're going to grow rice here. And we're going to grow tomatoes here. We're going to grow pistachios here. And apparently lots of almonds here. So keep putting more and more in. However, that is good for the environment, or not because it makes money. And until we change over that system, that they're always going to be putting in whatever's going to have the highest yield. And to have the highest yield, they're going to be putting in more acres or whatever XYZ is. So we're going to have to look at the university as to what they are teaching, as I said, and exporting their expertise around the world so they could continue. But climate is changing these places in India, Africa, and places around the world, so that making agriculture even more difficult. Subsistence agriculture, thank you. But you should be concerned. We've got food deserts here in Yolo County. We have got places here where the people who might be working out there doing the hard work to get the crops in, they don't have access to the fresh food. They don't have access to any of this. You can work up in KP Valley and we have these wonderful organic farms, and the people up there can't afford to buy it. There's no food, there's no stores there. It's, we got the corner markets, we got the dollar stores, and they don't have the best interest of our community there. And I think we need to be encouraging ways to get the fresh produce and food out to other members of our community who are right here in Yolo County.
Definitely agree with that. Yeah, I think it comes back to the economy. We have this growth extraction economy that's based on maximizing profits while people in our local county go hungry. There's no reason why local, fresh, organic food should be way more expensive than something imported from halfway across the world that came here with fossil fuels. Like the amount of inputs that went to bring that food to the supermarket is way less than what we can do in Yolo County. So I don't think of subsistence farming as a bad thing. I think it's actually a really resilient system if we have tons of little local food hubs. And I think part of the problem is that is the huge industrial system of agriculture that just gobbles up land and gobbles up soil nutrients and then sends them off again halfway across the world somewhere else. So I think, that we have to work with industry to help them change practice and make it more ecological. And, it's not like it's a fact in the county, maybe but what I think we need to focus on is degrowth of the economy. It's like we put so much emphasis on GDP, yet people go hungry. So it's like we could have the maximum GDP possible and people will still be hungry under the current system. So I think it ties back to the resilience question. If we have, what is the goal of a county? Is it to maximize GDP, or is it to make sure that all the residents are well taken care of? So I think that I don't know if any of us really answered your question, but I think we should have more resilient versions of subsistence farming. I know, 24 people in this area that they live pretty much off their homestead, and it's different in the cities, but I think it comes down to education, it comes down to water, it comes down to creating very hyper-local resilient landscapes instead of this like giant field of, not your soy, but, corn, or, I think we can, even the big industrial farmers are realizing that their practices are not sustainable and becoming less and less profitable. They're running out of soil. So I think if we can, we need to work with people, farms big and small, and create overlapping resiliencies in our food system. And I think subsistence in terms of local, hyper local is a really good thing.
The problem I see in our community is we seem to have the food. Like I've lived here pretty much for 25 years. So I've been fed for 25 years from the supermarket. And the problem I find is, like, we have the food, it's just some people are hungry. And so
one of the positive things that's happening is the food bank has really grown. Initially, it got started with funding from the county, and that's one of the things we can do.
yeah.
When you get a nonprofit that wants to do something, you put in some seed money from the county, and that's what we did. And then they had a tremendous fundraising effort. And then some of the farmers now are starting to donate food. I know Conaway donates a lot, but then they're going around to other farmers saying, hey, you need to do the same thing. You can donate more fresh fruit, vegetables, so that the food that is being passed out by the food bank is healthy food.
Yeah.
And I think we can make a lot of progress addressing local hunger in that way. But I do still think that we are going to be one of the areas in the world where agriculture is still healthier. And if you look at just with the current CO2 emissions, there's going to be a lot of areas of the world that are not going to be able to grow food. And that's scary because you have millions of people in those areas.
I'm, in hearing some of what you're saying, I'm intrigued and also concerned about equity. The people who drive the clunkiest old cars can't afford an electric car. The people who have the most inefficient appliances and all of that probably have them because they can't buy something better. People with limited mobility can't walk 8 blocks to get to the bus that will allow them not to have a car. So I'm just curious, in putting forth plans that you would want to do around climate change, how would you tweak those to be sure that the people who need to be considered don't get left behind?
Cool. Yeah, that's a hugely important question. And I think when it comes to transportation, having first and last mile connections so people can get picked up and brought to the bus stop, like those kinds of things. In terms of like electrical appliances or wood burning, that kind of thing, there's a lot of that does tend to happen in areas where they can't afford an electric heater. So if we talk about
Yeah, really. I don't smell smoke. It could be coffee.
I just talk a little bit about
I got to apologize, and I don't. Can I quickly say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I've got an event at 7 o'clock that was scheduled, so I'm sorry. I'm going to leave after that. So I'm sorry. Some of you guys came in later. That started a bit sooner. But equity is the biggest issue. I mean, if we can make all of these things, everybody has solar. Everybody has to have solar. Everybody has to drive e-cars. Everybody has to do this. Well, everybody can't afford that. About 98% of us can't. And so it's like we talked about California Energy Commission grant. You know, there's grants out there. I mean, that's a good people. You know, to get the money to them, to give the assistance there. Our senior community here. I mean, how do you afford to retrofit your homes?
Good job, Bob.
Good job, Bob.
Nice
Way
work.
to go, Bob. So what I left out here are some of my action plans, I call it, for this topic. And I thank you, Ellen, for the invite. And I thank you for being here at this. And get hold of me. I can go into more detail with you on any of these things. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Well, to answer that question too, I think that's a really important point. And I chair the Aging Commission, and that comes up all the time. I know when we have meetings in Davis, the bus system was just atrocious for someone actually trying to go from West Sacramento to Davis to come to a meeting, to the point where I would go pick people up myself. One of there's been some new ways of looking at transportation. Sacramento is experimenting with a system of I hate to use refer to Uber, but the Uber type approach to buses, where a person can contact the bus that will come directly to their house and take them to where they're going, and not Uber because of the other people that dropping people off in order, but much better for someone. And there's a lot of people that cannot go to a bus stop. They can't walk the 3 blocks, and they're either confined to their home or forced to take out the gas guzzling car. So I think we need to work with our transportation agencies to look at new approaches to transportation. And that's actually one of the things we were looking at on the Aging Commission is there a better way to do transportation so that more people can access it? But that's across the board in terms of we have to replace something for more energy efficiency. I know the Air Board has a program where they help farmers replace old equipment. So they will actually buy new equipment, and they help schools replace buses. Now, we don't have buses in Davis, school buses in Davis, but they'll replace an old bus with a new bus. And I think we need to have that type of approach to energy efficiency too. That's where we should look for some state resources from the Air Board, and they are quite generous when the resources become available, so that people who can't otherwise afford it can convert to more climate-friendly ways of living.
Just to finish my answer as well. So we talk about a Green New Deal, and then there's also what's known as a just transition, which is we're not just trying to achieve climate goals, but we're trying to do so in a way that empowers people that have been traditionally marginalized and communities that are most affected by climate change. And I think again, it ties back to our economic system, where we opened up cannabis in Yolo County, and who gets the permits, right? What if there was a worker co-op that got the permits to farm cannabis, and you had 200 worker owners? Like, that's equity to me. So as we move forward, I think we need to think about worker co-ops. We need to think about subsidies and access to, say, if it's all electric construction, or if people need to change out dirty heaters and stuff like that. That we should focus our resources primarily on to help low-income communities, because otherwise we're just leaving them be. We can't do that, and especially if we mandate legislation. I think any legislation that comes about that says we need to do something will also provide an opportunity of access for low-income communities, and then a lot of the transportation stuff as well. So I think equity should be at the forefront of any kind of Green New Deal. Hey, Alan, I know you didn't want to talk necessarily about the climate emergency declaration, or since it's in draft, but maybe it might be valuable. I wish Linda was still here for this part, that we talk about what should be included in a climate emergency declaration, kind of like general principles of how we move forward as Yolo County. I think we could probably open it up for everybody. How we move forward.
I actually have to leave.
You have to leave as well?
I have a 7 o'clock event. It must be.
Oh, okay. I'm the only one without a 7 o'clock event tonight. But maybe that could be like a group discussion of how we do a climate emergency declaration and mobilization in a way that makes sense, just as general principle.
Mm-hmm. I don't really know what that means exactly, what you're asking, but I mean, I think if you want to have a group conversation with all of us here and kind of discuss that, I would definitely love to do that. I'll be mindful of your time since you have to be heading out. And so I guess we could just adjourn for this time and then continue having a conversation.
I'll address that first before I. I think what's most valuable is to have the goals and then to have a way to get there. The specifics, I mean, we could suggest these are some specific steps that could be taken, but we don't really know yet. For example, we were talking about where are the greatest carbon emissions and developing an approach that focuses on meeting the goals. And so having the goals in there, I think, is really important. And I think ambitious goals, because if we set wimpy goals, we'll have a wimpy response. We set the goals higher and achieve more. Even if we don't reach them, which we hope we would, at least we'll be much further along. So having the goals, and then maybe and declaring an emergency, the whereases, citing the United Nations reports, the various reports on starvation, the various reports on consequences that are occurring now and will occur in the future. And then some suggestions. These are things that should be considered, but we shouldn't tie our hands to a particular approach because we'll develop the approach as we go forward.
Can I just ask a follow-up question on that? I was part of the small group that created the Davis Plan Emergency Resolution back last spring.
Okay.
And one of the elements of that was the city's commitment to accelerate climate action plan update. I'm wondering if there's some activity going on at the county level to update climate action.
We are, yeah. In fact, that's we're calling sustainability plan. I'm not sure why I like climate action better, but it's on our calendar. It's coming back to us, and the first step is being it's a recommendation to hire a consultant to look into solutions, which is really timely to actually have a resolution that says what the goals should be, so that the person who's looking will know what they're looking at, and then hopefully something that can pass those same goals in all the cities and other local jurisdictions, so that we all have one goal in mind. And part of what we were doing, and I said this earlier, was to try to get the other cities to agree on one consultant to work for all of us, so that when we start developing the strategic plan, it's a plan that can encompass the county and all the cities and the towns, everybody.
It's an interesting idea. Davis put out an RFP, I think, last month for a consultant, but it's aimed more at the consultant to lead the process, the consultative process, rather than come up with the content.
Well, not that they come up with the content, but they guide us all towards getting to the content. Okay. We'll need experts to get us there. And I do like the approach of having a committee of experts that will guide us as well and give us information. Because I know on the Habitat Conservation Plan, the level of knowledge that they had was so much greater than I will ever have in my lifetime that we couldn't have got there without them.
I'd like to say something. Thanks to you guys for convening tonight and putting this together. But I think if we're talking about a climate emergency, it's like there's a lot of people talking about an emergency, but people aren't acting like there's an emergency. So it's just like people are well aware of what's going on, but what are we going to do? So, especially when you're here tonight and hearing you guys.
Well, thank you. Every time I see a new big SUV purchase, I think, what's that person thinking?
I mean, I could think of even a worse scenario right now where we're going to potentially building, a 240,000 square foot warehouse for submersible robotics that are doing exploratory research for oil still. And I think that right now, if we burn all the oil that we have now, we're going to be in a crisis. We're in a crisis. So why are we going to go keep looking for more? We should supporting that. We should our goals on. Yeah.
Where's the warehouse? Bingo.
Yeah, awesome.
Where's
West Sacramento?
West Sacramento.
Okay, so
that's just something to think about. If we're trying to become carbon neutral, well, we can't say we're doing it here, but yet support things somewhere else.
Yeah.
Where's our real goal and vision?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you have to look at every project with that lens. And I know when things come before the county, we get like a paragraph, this is the impact on the budget. This might be the impact on agriculture, but there isn't one that says this is the impact on
what's the environmental change. Kind of like environmental impact study would direct and indirect.
Yeah.
Kind of, lens if you want to look at it.
Yeah, I think that should be part of every decision is to at least look at it. And you know, the environmental impact reports are one thing, 300-page documents that people find difficult to read, but I mean, just in the first page that we get where it says economic impact, impact on this, impact on that, it should say impact on our climate change goals, taking us forward or backwards.
So how does it align with some of the goals that some people are saying they have? You know?
Yes.
You can't say one thing and do another. We're paying attention now.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I have to run. But
Okay. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Thanks for putting this on. Thank you. Yes, it was good. Yeah, nice discussion.
I must be going to one of the meetings that they're.
Thank you.
So, do you want to go over
Well, it's kind of what Alfred said. It's like declaration and mobilization. It's not enough to declare an emergency. It's like we have to mobilize. So like if we get a county document passed, which there's a group of like 25 of us now that are working on that, we're actually drafting a climate emergency action or climate emergency declaration and mobilization effort for county government, which basically says, yes, we declare an emergency. No, that's not enough. We're mobilizing task forces through all departments of the government to actually do something about it. You know, not just declare an emergency. You know, we've been meeting with Don Saylor as well, and he thinks that it's like kind of what Jim said as well. With climate becomes part of like at the forefront of every consideration. Do we do this? Do we do that? Oh, I don't know. How does it impact our climate and community goals? So I think it's like, yeah, dual aspect. And then it's like starts task forces, and then to me, the next step after that, you have climate emergency declaration and mobilization, and then you have to figure out how do we do it, right? So I think a community-driven local Green New Deal legislation lays out each different area of like agriculture, transportation. In Seattle just passed a local Green New Deal, which we're adapting into a Yolo County version that deals with all these issues and puts equity at the forefront of that and a just transition from fossil fuels. So I think it's like to me, it's like you get the declaration, mobilization, and that could be passed as soon as January 28th. So basically, Scott's part of this group too. We've been meeting up. We had a meeting at the library, and we have a pretty good draft, and it needs a little bit of work just to condense. And then we're going to present it for a vote with the county supervisors. Yeah.
Just that it's work in progress.
Yeah.
The extent to which we declare an emergency is most and the idea of creating mobilizations in fighting for the budget one, and that those that is the mobilization ideas, on the ideas, etc. for the public. So we're not going to go outside.
Right.
I just don't want that impression.
Right.
Is that what you want?
Yeah. So basically, we're like chewing through the whole thing now and seeing what we can condense. But definitely, like we need to like it calls for public input and like making sure that the most marginalized communities are part of the process of drafting the solutions. So it's not just like the same old. We think that the poor people want this, or you know,
The rich people want that.
right.
Let me ask a process question, because what I heard from you was going from the declaration and mobilization, and then a Green New Deal that's going to have a bunch of elements. But isn't there an intermediate step, which was what Jim was talking about, formation of a sustainability plan, a climate action plan, where you actually develop what are the specific strategies, what are the specific actions?
Right.
Where in the process is that, or how do these pieces fit together?
Yeah, that's a good question. question. I think like a local Green New Deal isn't like a piece of paper. Be like, here's the local Green New Deal. It's like a community process that we figure out together. So I think, you know, it's I don't think they're not mutually.
So be in the process of figuring out the content of the Green New Deal through some community-wide collaborative effort.
Yeah, I think it has to come from the ground up, and all the communities of interest, everyone who's affected by all these areas that we highlight as transportation, as carbon emissions or regenerative projects, like they should be driven from the communities and the experts, all the researchers. And with the climate consultant and the task forces of government, it's just such a, like, I tried to map it out and it ended up like 30 different hubs of action, but it's got to be a community effort. If we rely on government to come up with solutions for us, then I think we'll be in trouble.
Right. You know, there are pieces of the whole story, but I think there needs to be some kind of structure to enable that.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment about that? Which is I had a short conversation with Carrie Lux today. She's the person who, in the city of Davis, who is putting out the RFP for the climate, to update the climate action plan. And she said that the climate action plan proposal from consultants were due today at 4 o'clock. So it seems to me like, you know, people who are interested in helping develop a plan should talk to Carrie and sort of try to talk to her about the process by which a plan would be created. And this is not only just for the city of Davis, but the Yolo County has a climate action plan. And just as Jim was saying, they're planning on updating it as well. So that would be another way to sort of.
Google document?
What's that?
A Google document?
Well, I think that.
On the city website, the RFP is posted.
Okay.
That was put out, I think, in November. And if you go to sustainability under the City of Davis menu, you should find climate action plan update. They issued an RFP, and that would lay out exactly what they're looking for the consultant to do.
RFP.
Pardon me? A request for proposal. Basically, it's an invitation for consultants to bid to provide services.